moment Penelope Bradford stepped into the dusty mercantile in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. Three women in pristine Sunday dresses turned their noses up at her like she carried the stench of 1,000 cattle drives. It was June 1878, and the summer heat pressed down on everything in that mountain town, but nothing felt as suffocating as the weight of their judgment. "Would you look at what the wind dragged in?" one of them said loud enough for half the store to hear. The speaker was Margaret Holloway, wife of the bank president, and her companions giggled behind gloved hands. "I suppose some people don't know that rags went out of fashion about 10 years ago." Penelope's cheeks burned red, but she kept her eyes fixed on the shelf of canned goods in front of her. The dress she wore had been her mother's once, back when the fabric still held color and the hem hadn't frayed to threads. After her father died in a mining accident 2 years ago and her mother succumbed to fever last winter, this dress was one of 3 items of clothing Penelope owned. She worked 14 hours a day cleaning rooms at the Mountain View Inn for barely enough coin to keep herself fed and sheltered in a closet-sized room above the stable. "I heard she sleeps with the horses," another woman whispered, not quietly enough. "Fitting, given how she looks." The third woman, whose name Penelope didn't know, let out a sharp laugh. Perhaps someone should tell her that bathing is free at the creek. Penelope's hands trembled as she reached for a tin of beans. She had bathed just that morning in the cold water behind her lodgings, scrubbing her skin raw with lye soap she made herself from ashes and fat. The dress was clean, just worn beyond repair. Pride straightened her spine even as tears threatened to spill. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. "Ladies," a deep voice rumbled from somewhere behind them, "I believe the good Lord had some thoughts about casting stones." The mercantile fell silent. Penelope turned along with everyone else to see a mountain of a man filling the doorway. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they nearly brushed both sides of the frame. His hair fell past his shoulders in dark waves, and his face bore the weathered tan of someone who spent his life under the open sky. Muscles strained against the fabric of his worn shirt, and his hands looked like they could snap a tree trunk in half. Everything about him spoke of raw strength and untamed wilderness. "Mr. Garrison," Margaret Holloway said, her voice losing its sharp edge, "this is hardly your concern." The man stepped into the store, his boots heavy on the wooden planks. Penelope noticed his eyes then, a striking gray-blue like storm clouds over the mountains. Those eyes moved from the 3 women to Penelope, and something in his expression softened. "Seems to me it became my concern the moment you decided to act like a pack of coyotes cornering a rabbit," he said. His voice carried the kind of authority that made people listen whether they wanted to or not. "Now, I suggest you ladies finish your shopping and mind your own business." Margaret opened her mouth as if to protest, but the look he gave her could have frozen the Arkansas River in July. She snapped her mouth shut, gathered her skirts, and marched toward the counter with her companions scurrying behind her. Within minutes, they had paid for their goods and swept out of the store in a rustle of expensive fabric and wounded pride. Penelope stood frozen, unsure whether to thank the stranger or flee before anyone associated her with more trouble. He turned his full attention to her, and she found herself unable to look away from those storm cloud eyes. "You all right, miss?" he asked, his voice gentler now. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Up close, he was even more imposing, all solid muscle and raw masculine power. He smelled of pine trees and leather and something wild she couldn't name. There was a scar along his jawline, barely visible beneath several days' worth of beard, and his hands bore the calluses of hard labor. "Name's Zachary Garrison," he said. "Most folks call me Zach. I have a cabin up in the mountains. Come down for supplies once a month or so." "Penelope Bradford," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for what you did, but you didn't have to." "Yes, I did." He said it with such simple conviction that she believed him. "No call for them to treat anyone that way, especially not someone who's done nothing but exist in the same space as them." The store owner, Mr. Peterson, cleared his throat from behind the counter. He was a balding man with kind eyes who had always treated Penelope fairly. "Zach's one of the best trappers in these parts," he offered. "Brings down furs and game, lives up on the mountain alone, mostly." Zach ignored the introduction, his attention still fixed on Penelope. She felt exposed under that gaze, as if he could see straight through to all the hunger and loneliness and fear she tried so hard to hide. But there was no pity in his eyes, only a steady recognition that made her feel, for the first time in months, like a person rather than a ghost. "That dress giving you trouble?" he asked, nodding toward her worn skirts. Shame flooded through her again, hot and bitter. "It's what I have." "Didn't ask what it was, asked if it's giving you trouble." He paused, then added, "Seems like it might be making your life harder than it needs to be." Before she could respond, he turned to Mr. Peterson. "You still have those bolts of silk that came in from Little Rock?" Peterson's eyebrows shot up. "I do, but Zach, that's expensive fabric. You planning to take up sewing?" "Just answer the question." "Yes, I have them. 3 bolts, green, blue, and a sort of rose color." Zach looked back at Penelope. "You have a favorite color?" She stared at him, convinced she had misheard. "I don't understand." "It's not a complicated question." "Blue, green, pink?" Her mind felt sluggish, unable to process what was happening. "Blue, I suppose, but Mr. Garrison, I couldn't possibly, wasn't asking if you could, was asking what color." He turned back to Peterson. "I'll take the blue bolt, all of it, and I'll need thread, needles, good scissors, whatever else someone needs to make a proper dress." Peterson's mouth fell open. "That's going to cost you near about $40, Zach." "Then it's fortunate I have $40. He pulled a leather pouch from his belt and counted out coins on the counter. "I'll also take supplies for the lady here, whatever she came in to buy, plus a month's worth of decent food, flour, sugar, coffee, beans, bacon, canned goods. Put together a proper parcel." Penelope's head spun. "Mr. Garrison, I cannot accept this. It's far too much. I don't even know you." He finally looked at her again, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Maybe not, but I know enough. I know those women had no right to speak to you that way. I know you came in here just trying to survive another week, and I know that sometimes the difference between giving up and keeping on is someone showing you that you matter." "But why?" The question came out barely louder than a breath. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Something flickered across his face, too quick to identify. "Let's just say I know what it's like to be looked at like you're nothing, and I know how much it means when someone proves them wrong." Mr. Peterson had already started gathering items, his expression bemused but not unkind. Penelope watched as he piled flour, sugar, coffee, and more food than she had seen in one place since before her father died. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to shed in front of everyone. "I'll pay you back," she said, though she had no idea how. "Every cent. It might take time, but I will." Zach shook his head. "Not a loan. It's a gift. No strings, no debt. I can't just take charity." "It's not charity." His voice remained gentle but firm. "Think of it as one human being helping another. Nothing more complicated than that." Peterson wrapped the silk carefully in brown paper, then began loading supplies into a large crate. "This is going to be heavy," he warned. "You'll need help getting it wherever you're staying." "I'll see to it," Zach said immediately. He looked at Penelope. "Where are you lodging?" "The Mountain View Inn. I have a room above the stable." Something dark flashed in his eyes. "You're living in a stable room." "It's what I can afford." She lifted her chin, defensive despite his earlier kindness. "It keeps the rain off, and Mrs. Henderson only charges me $2 a month since I work there." He looked like he wanted to say something about that, but held back. "All right then, let's get these supplies to your room." The walk from the Mercantile to the inn took only minutes, but Penelope felt every eye in town following them. Zachary Garrison carried the heavy crate as if it weighed nothing, his muscles flexing beneath his shirt with the effort. She led him around back to the rickety stairs that led up to her room, acutely aware of what he would see. The room was barely 10 feet square, with a thin mattress on a wooden frame, a wobbly table and chair, and a single shelf for her few belongings. One small window looked out over the mountains, and she had tacked up dried wildflowers to make it feel less bleak. It was clean, but obviously impoverished. Zach set the crate down carefully and looked around without comment. "You make it nice," he finally said. "The flowers are a good touch." She had expected pity or disgust. His simple acceptance made her throat tight. "Thank you." He turned to face her in the cramped space, and suddenly the room felt even smaller. He was so large, so vitally present, that he seemed to fill every corner with his energy. Miss Bradford, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Her pulse quickened. What is it? Are you safe here? Are you fed? Do you have what you need? The questions were so direct, so earnest, that she found herself answering truthfully. I'm safe enough. Mrs. Henderson is fair, even if her son isn't always respectful. I'm fed mostly. And no, I don't have what I need, but I'm surviving. That's more than some can say. He nodded slowly, processing her words. And if you had a choice? If you could go somewhere else, be somewhere better, would you? Mr. Garrison. Zach, please. Zach, she amended. I don't have choices. I have a job that keeps me alive and a roof over my head. That's the reality of my situation. What if I changed that reality? Her heart hammered against her ribs. What do you mean? He ran a hand through his long hair, suddenly looking uncertain for the first time since she had met him. I'm not saying this right. I live alone up on the mountain, have for 5 years now. It's a good cabin, solid, with a creek nearby and game plentiful. I make enough from trapping and hunting to live comfortably. Not rich, but comfortable. That sounds like a good life, she said carefully, unsure where this was leading. It's lonely, he admitted. I chose it that way after some things happened that made me want to get away from people. But lately I've been thinking maybe I've been alone long enough. And then today, I saw you standing in that store, refusing to let those women break you. And I thought, he trailed off, shaking his head. This is going to sound insane. Tell me anyway. He met her eyes, and the vulnerability she saw there stole her breath. Come with me. Up to the mountain. Stay in the cabin. Have your own room. No expectations. Just give yourself time to figure out what you want without worrying about where your next meal comes from or whether your dress is good enough for people who aren't worth your time anyway. Penelope opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. You're asking me to move into your cabin? A man I met an hour ago? I know how it sounds. I know you have no reason to trust me. But I swear on my life, I would never hurt you or force you into anything. You would have your own space, your own privacy. He struggled for words. I just can't walk away knowing you're barely scraping by when I could help. And maybe, if I'm being honest, I could use the company. The good kind of company, I mean. Someone to talk to. Someone who might want to be there instead of just existing in survival mode. It was the craziest proposition Penelope had ever heard. Every ounce of common sense screamed at her to refuse, to thank him for the supplies and send him on his way. But something deeper, some instinct she didn't fully understand, told her that Zachary Garrison was exactly what he appeared to be. A good man who had been hurt, who understood pain, and who was offering her a chance at something better. I would need to give Mrs. Henderson notice, she heard herself say. It wouldn't be right to just abandon my position. Hope flared in his eyes. You're considering it? I'm considering that staying here means working myself to death for barely enough to survive, while you're offering me a chance to catch my breath. That's not really a choice at all, is it? A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his rugged features into something almost beautiful. When can you be ready? 2 days? I should work through the week since it's already Thursday. 2 days, he agreed. I'll be back Sunday morning with my wagon. Pack what you want to keep. The rest we can leave or give away. After he left, Penelope sank onto her bed and stared at the crate of supplies. The silk wrapped in brown paper seemed to glow in the afternoon light filtering through her window. She had no idea if she was making the best decision of her life or the worst. But for the first time since her mother died, she felt something that might have been hope. The next 2 days passed in a blur of whispered conversations and knowing looks. Mrs. Henderson seemed relieved rather than upset when Penelope gave notice, admitting that business was slow, and she had been struggling to afford even the small wage she paid. She wished Penelope well with genuine warmth, pressing a small jar of honey into her hands as a parting gift. Sunday morning arrived crisp and clear. Penelope had spent Saturday evening sewing herself a simple dress from the blue silk, her hands remembering skills her mother had taught her years ago. The fabric felt like water against her skin, smooth and cool and impossibly fine. When she looked at herself in the tiny cracked mirror Mrs. Henderson let her borrow, she barely recognized the young woman staring back. The dress fit well, highlighting a figure that months of poor eating had made too thin but couldn't completely diminish. Her dark hair, washed and braided, hung over one shoulder. She looked, she thought, like someone worth noticing for the right reasons. Zach arrived just after dawn, driving a sturdy wagon pulled by two massive draft horses. When he saw her standing at the top of the stairs in the blue silk dress, he stopped mid-step and simply stared. "Miss Bradford," he said, his voice rough with something she couldn't name. "You look beautiful." Heat flooded her cheeks. "Thank you. The silk was perfect. I've never worn anything so fine." He climbed the stairs, and she noticed he had trimmed his beard and tied his hair back. He wore clean clothes, and she caught the scent of soap. He had made an effort for her, she realized, and the thought warmed something deep in her chest. "Is this everything?" he asked, gesturing to her two small bags. "Everything that matters." She had so little that it fit into one bag of clothes and another of personal items, her mother's wedding ring, her father's pocket watch, a few books. He carried her bags down as easily as if they were filled with feathers. The morning air was sweet with the scent of honeysuckle and pine. A few early risers watched from windows as Zach helped Penelope onto the wagon seat, his hands steady and respectful on her waist. She settled into place, and he climbed up beside her, taking up the reins. "Ready?" he asked. She took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." The wagon lurched forward, and Eureka Springs began to fall away behind them. They took a rough trail that wound up into the Ozark Mountains, leaving the town and all its small-minded cruelty behind. The higher they climbed, the more Penelope felt like she could breathe. The mountain air was clean and cool, filled with the songs of birds and the rustle of leaves. "How far is your cabin?" she asked after they had been traveling for an hour. "About 3 hours from town. Remote, but that's how I like it." He glanced at her. "Too remote?" "No," she said honestly. "It sounds peaceful." They fell into comfortable silence, broken occasionally by Zach pointing out landmarks or telling her about the area. He spoke about the mountains with deep affection, describing the best fishing spots, where bears denned in winter, which trails were safe and which were treacherous. His love for this wild place was evident in every word. "How did you end up here?" she asked eventually. "Living alone on a mountain?" His jaw tightened slightly. "That's a long story." "We have time." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, slowly, he began to speak. "I was married once. Her name was Sarah. We lived in Kansas, had a small farm. She was pregnant with our first child." His voice went flat, emotionless in the way of someone reciting facts to keep pain at bay. "Raiders came through, Confederate sympathizers, though the war had been over for years. They were just bandits using old causes as an excuse. They burned farms, killed anyone who got in their way. I was out hunting when they came. By the time I got back," Penelope reached over and placed her hand on his arm. "I'm sorry. I tracked them. Took me months, but I found every single one." He didn't elaborate on what happened then, but the look in his eyes told her enough. "When it was done, I realized I had nothing left. No home, no family, no desire to be around people who could do such things to each other. So I came here, built a cabin, and tried to forget." "Have you? Forgotten?" "No." The word was simple, honest. "But I've learned to live with it. The mountains helped, the silence helped, and time helps, even when you don't think it will." She understood then why he had helped her, why he had seen her pain and responded to it. He knew what it was like to lose everything, to feel alone in a world that could be unspeakably cruel. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. He glanced at her, and some of the hardness left his expression. "Seemed only fair. You're trusting me with your safety. Least I could do is trust you with my story." The trail grew steeper and narrower. Trees pressed close on both sides, their branches forming a green canopy overhead. They forded a shallow creek, water splashing up over the wheels. Penelope caught glimpses of wildlife, a deer bounding away, a fox watching them from the undergrowth, birds she couldn't name singing from hidden perches. Finally, after 3 hours of steady climbing, they emerged into a clearing, and Penelope gasped. The cabin was larger than she had expected, built from solid logs with a stone chimney rising from one end. A covered porch wrapped around the front, and flower boxes beneath the windows overflowed with wild roses. Behind the cabin, the mountain rose in a dramatic sweep of stone and forest. In front, the land sloped down to a crystal-clear creek that sang over smooth rocks. The view stretched for miles, showing layer after layer of blue-green mountains fading into the distance. "Oh," she breathed. "Zach, it's beautiful." Pride touched his features. "Built it myself, every log. Took me a year, but I wanted it done right." He helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Come on, I'll show you inside." The interior was just as impressive. The main room held a stone fireplace, a solid table with 4 chairs, comfortable-looking furniture, and shelves lined with books. A kitchen area occupied one corner, well-stocked and organized. 2 doors led off the main room. "That one's my room," Zach said, pointing to the left door. "This one's yours." He opened the right door to reveal a spacious bedroom with a real bed covered in quilts, a chest of drawers, a washstand with a porcelain pitcher and basin, and another window with a view of the mountains. "I built this room thinking maybe someday, well, it doesn't matter. Point is, it's yours for as long as you want it." Penelope walked into the room, trailing her fingers over the smooth wood of the furniture. Everything was well made, built with care and attention to detail. "You did all this yourself?" "Helps to have something to do with your hands when your mind won't quiet down." She turned to look at him standing in the doorway, too large for the frame, his expression uncertain despite his size and strength. This man, who could probably tear apart a bear with his bare hands, was worried about whether she approved of the room he had made. Something shifted in her chest, a wall she had built around her heart developing its first crack. "It's perfect," she said. "Thank you, Zach, for all of this." Relief washed over his face. "You hungry? I can make us some lunch." Over the next few weeks, they fell into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Zach woke before dawn and tended to his trap lines, returning by mid-morning. Penelope discovered she had a talent for cooking game meat, experimenting with the herbs that grew wild around the cabin. She cleaned and organized, sewed curtains from fabric Zach brought from town, planted a vegetable garden in the sunny patch behind the house. They ate meals together, talking about everything and nothing. He taught her to fish in the creek, laughing when she squealed the first time she caught a trout. She taught him to make proper biscuits, teasing him when his first attempt came out like rocks. In the evenings, they sat on the porch and watched the sunset over the mountains. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they simply existed in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the forest. Penelope felt herself relaxing, unfurling like a flower that had been closed tight against the cold. The constant fear and hunger that had defined her life in town faded, replaced by a sense of safety she had never expected to feel again. Zach was unfailingly respectful, never pushing for more than she offered, always mindful of her space and privacy. But she caught him watching her sometimes with an expression that made her breath catch. And she found herself watching him in return, noticing the way his muscles flexed when he chopped wood, the gentleness in his hands when he cleaned fish, the rare smile that transformed his serious face into something breathtaking. One evening in late July, a storm rolled in over the mountains. Thunder shook the cabin, and lightning illuminated the world in sharp flashes of white. Penelope stood at the window, watching nature's fury with mingled fear and awe. "Never seen a mountain storm before?" Zach asked from his chair by the fire. "Not like this. In town there were buildings blocking the view. This is," she searched for words, "magnificent, terrifying, both at once." He came to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "That's the mountains. Everything here is intense. The beauty, the danger, the life. No halfway measures." She looked up at him, at the profile of his face lit by firelight and lightning. "Is that why you love it?" "Part of it. Mostly I love that it's honest. A mountain doesn't pretend to be something it's not. It just is. I appreciate that after," he trailed off. "After people proved they could pretend to be civilized while doing monstrous things." His eyes met hers, surprise and recognition in their depths. "Yeah, exactly that." Lightning flashed again, closer this time. The thunder came almost simultaneously, a crack so loud Penelope jumped. Without thinking, Zach put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her against his side. She stiffened for only a moment before letting herself lean into his strength. He was solid and warm, and she felt safer in his embrace than she had anywhere else. "I've got you," he murmured. "Storm can't hurt you here. Cabin's weathered worse." They stood like that for a long time, watching the storm rage and slowly pass. Even after the thunder faded to distant rumbles, neither of them moved. Finally, Penelope turned her face up to his. "Zach," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "When you asked me to come here, you said no expectations, and you've kept that promise. You've been nothing but respectful and kind. But I think I want there to be expectations now." His arm tightened around her. "Penelope, I don't want you to feel obligated." "I don't." She placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heart beating strong and fast. "I feel grateful and safe, and something else that I'm almost afraid to name because it seems too soon, too fast." "What do you feel?" His voice was rough, barely more than a whisper. "Like maybe I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them for a heartbeat. Then Zach cupped her face in his hands, those large, calloused hands that could break bone, but held her like she was made of spun glass. "Penelope Bradford, I've been half in love with you since I saw you standing in that mercantile, refusing to let them break you. And I've been falling the rest of the way every day since." "Then kiss me," she said. "Please." He lowered his head slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind. When his lips finally met hers, Penelope felt like lightning had struck her directly. The kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if he feared his own strength. But when she pressed closer, rising on her toes and wrapping her arms around his neck, something broke free in both of them. His arms came around her, lifting her clear off her feet, and the kiss deepened into something that stole all thought. She tasted hunger and longing and hope on his lips, and she answered with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zach rested his forehead against hers. "I want you to stay. Not as a guest, not as someone I'm helping. Stay as mine and let me be yours." "Yes," she breathed. "Yes to all of it." He kissed her again, and then again, as if making up for all the weeks of holding back. When he finally set her down, his eyes were dark with desire, but also soft with tenderness. "We should do this right. Court properly. Give you time to be sure." "I'm sure now." "You say that, but you've only known me 2 months. You deserve to be certain, to have no doubts." She smiled up at him, this massive, gentle man who worried about her doubts when she had none. "All right, court me then. Though I warn you, I'm already convinced." The courting that followed was unlike anything Penelope had imagined. Zach brought her wildflowers every morning, presenting them with an endearing shyness. He took her on long walks through the mountains, showing her hidden waterfalls and meadows carpeted with columbine. He taught her to shoot his rifle, standing behind her with his arms bracketing hers, his breath warm on her neck as he explained about sights and breathing. She made his favorite meals and sat beside him in the evenings, reading aloud from the books on his shelves while he whittled small animals from wood, occasionally gifting her with a perfect carving of a fox or bird. They kissed often, those kisses growing deeper and more urgent as summer turned toward fall. But Zach always pulled back before things went too far, insisting on propriety even though they lived alone on a mountain with no one to judge them but the trees. "I won't have you with regrets," he told her one night when she protested his restraint. "I won't have you thinking later that I took advantage." "You're the most frustrating man I've ever met," she said, but she loved him for it. As August faded into September, Penelope realized she had never been happier. Her body had filled out with regular meals, adding curves to her frame. Her skin glowed with health, and her eyes sparkled with contentment. She caught Zach watching her with such naked desire that it made her shiver, but still he held back, waiting for something she didn't fully understand. The answer came on a cool morning in late September. They had gone to town for supplies, a trip they made together once a month now. Penelope wore one of the dresses she had made from the silk, and she walked through Eureka Springs with her head high, Zach's presence beside her, making her feel invincible. The same women who had mocked her months ago stared with open envy and barely concealed spite. Margaret Holloway actually approached them outside the mercantile. "Miss Bradford," she said, her voice dripping false sweetness, What a surprise to see you looking so well. I had heard you moved up the mountain with Mr. Garrison. How rustic that must be." Penelope smiled, genuinely unbothered by the attempted barb. "It's paradise, actually. But thank you for your concern." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "And are you two—" She left the question hanging, the implication clear. Before Penelope could respond, Zach stepped forward. His voice was calm but carried an edge that could cut glass. "Miss Bradford and I are courting, if that's what you're asking. And before you get any ideas about spreading gossip, know that my intentions are entirely honorable." "Courting," Margaret repeated as if the word was foreign. "How quaint." "More than that." Zach reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. "Penelope, I had planned to do this back at the cabin, somewhere private and special. But standing here in front of the people who tried to break you seems right somehow." Penelope's heart stopped as he opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small sapphire stone. It wasn't elaborate or expensive, but it was clearly made with care. "I love you," Zach said, his eyes locked on hers as if no one else existed. "I love your strength and your kindness. I love the way you sing while you cook and how you're not afraid of storms. I love that you took a chance on a broken man living alone on a mountain. Marry me, Penelope. Make that cabin a home. Make my life mean something again." Tears streamed down her face. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then lifted her off her feet and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her right there on the main street of Eureka Springs, a kiss that left no doubt about his feelings. When they broke apart, Margaret and her friends had disappeared, unwilling to witness happiness they couldn't poison. "Did you really just propose to me in the middle of town?" Penelope asked, still dazed. "Seemed appropriate. They saw you at your lowest. Now they can see you at your highest." He grinned, that rare, beautiful smile that made him look years younger. "Also, I couldn't wait another minute. I've had that ring for 3 weeks, and keeping it secret was killing me." They married a week later, in a small ceremony at the cabin with only the preacher from town and Mr. Peterson as witnesses. Penelope wore a dress of rose-colored silk, the color of sunrise over the mountains. Zach wore new clothes, but kept his hair long because she asked him to, saying she loved running her fingers through it. They spoke their vows with the forest as their cathedral and the creek providing music. That night, in the room that had been hers but was now theirs, Zach finally let go of his restraint. He was gentle despite his strength, worshipful in his touches, murmuring her name like a prayer. Penelope discovered that all the raw power she had observed in him translated to passion that left her breathless and aching in the best ways. They came together like the storm that had brought them to their first kiss, all thunder and lightning and overwhelming sensation, and afterward lay tangled in quilts, her head on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. "No regrets?" he asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "Not a single one." "You?" "Only that I didn't buy you that silk sooner. Could have had months more of this." She laughed and kissed his chest. "We have the rest of our lives. I think that's enough time." The first year of their marriage passed in a blur of happiness and discovery. Winter came, blanketing the mountain in snow, and Penelope learned to love the enforced isolation, the way they became each other's entire world. Zach taught her to snowshoe and ice fish. She made the cabin warm and welcoming, filling it with the smell of fresh bread and stew. They made love by firelight while snow fell outside, and Penelope thought she had never imagined such contentment existed. Spring returned, bringing wildflowers and new life. Penelope realized her monthly courses had stopped and recognized the signs her mother had once described. She waited until she was certain before telling Zach one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I'm pregnant," she said simply. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for. Joy flooded his face, followed immediately by concern. "Are you well? Do you need to see a doctor? Should you be sitting out here? Is the chair comfortable enough?" She laughed at his sudden overprotectiveness. "I'm fine. Women have babies all the time. I'm healthy and strong, thanks to your care these past months." He pulled her into his lap, careful even in his excitement. "A baby. Our baby." His hand settled on her still flat stomach with such tenderness it made her eyes sting. I thought I'd never have this. After Sarah and the baby died, I thought this part of my life was over. You're going to be a wonderful father, she assured him, covering his hand with hers. He was indeed wonderful, sometimes to the point of being overwhelming. He insisted she rest more, eat more, do less. He built a cradle with his own hands, carving it with intricate designs of forest animals. He worried constantly about her comfort and safety, to the point where she finally had to tell him to stop hovering. I'm pregnant, not made of spun glass, she said, exasperated after he tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of laundry. I need to move, to work, to feel useful. He looked chastened. I'm sorry. I just can't stand the thought of anything happening to you or the baby. She softened, understanding his fear. Nothing will happen. But you have to let me live, Zach. Trust that I know my limits. He tried, though she often caught him watching her with worried eyes. As her belly grew round with their child, he became even more attentive, rubbing her feet when they swelled, making sure she ate well, holding her when the baby's movements made it hard to sleep. The baby came in January, in the middle of a snowstorm that trapped them in the cabin. Zach delivered his own son with shaking hands and tears streaming down his face. The boy came into the world screaming his displeasure, healthy and strong. When Zach placed him in Penelope's arms, she saw the ghosts of his past finally laid to rest in his eyes. What should we name him? She asked. You choose. You did all the hard work. She smiled at her husband, this man who had saved her with silk and kindness and fierce, protective love. Thomas, after my father. Thomas Garrison. Thomas, Zach repeated, touching his son's tiny hand with one massive finger. He's perfect. You're perfect. God, Penelope, I love you so much. I love you too, more than I ever thought possible. They sat together in the firelight, the storm raging outside while inside their cabin warm and safe, a family complete. Thomas nursed hungrily, and Zach watched them both with an expression of such profound happiness that Penelope's heart ached with the beauty of it. The years that followed were full of life and love. Thomas grew into a strong, curious boy with his father's gray-blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. 2 years after Thomas came Margaret, named for Penelope's mother, who had Zach's spirit and Penelope's stubborn determination. The cabin rang with children's laughter, with the sounds of a family fully alive. Zach continued trapping and hunting, but now he came home each day to chaos and noise and love. He taught Thomas to track and hunt, showing infinite patience with a boy's enthusiasm. He was gentle with Margaret, letting her climb all over him like he was a mountain to be conquered. Penelope watched him with their children and fell in love with him all over again, seeing the man he had always been under the hurt and isolation, generous and kind and so full of love he could barely contain it. They made trips to town occasionally, and people treated them with respect now. Penelope was known as Mrs. Garrison, the mountain man's wife, and her past as the poor girl in the tattered dress had faded into history. She saw Margaret Holloway sometimes, looking older and bitter, and felt only pity. That woman's cruelty had inadvertently led to Penelope's greatest happiness. 5 years after they married, on a summer evening much like the one when they had first kissed, Penelope and Zach sat on the porch while their children played in the creek. Thomas was teaching Margaret how to catch minnows, both of them squealing and laughing. I never thanked you properly, Penelope said, watching their children. For what? For seeing me. That day in the mercantile, you could have walked away. Most men would have, but you saw me, really saw me, and you decided I mattered. Zach reached over and took her hand, the sapphire ring he had given her still bright on her finger. I saw someone worth knowing, worth saving, worth loving. I wasn't worth all that. Not then. I was just trying to survive. You're wrong. His voice was firm. You were always worth it. Those women, they saw your dress and thought they knew everything about you. But I saw your spine, the way you refused to break. That's what drew me to you. Not pity. Recognition. She leaned her head on his shoulder, comfortable in the way only years of intimacy allowed. You saved me. We saved each other. He kissed the top of her head. I was dying up here alone, Penelope. I just didn't know it until I saw what living could look like with the right person. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the mountains gold and pink. Thomas helped Margaret out of the creek, both children dripping and happy. They ran toward the cabin, and Zach called out that they needed to dry off before coming inside. "I'm pregnant again," Penelope said softly. Zach's head whipped toward her. "Really? Really? About 3 months along, I think." He let out a whoop of joy that startled the children, then scooped Penelope up despite her protests. "Another baby! We're having another baby!" Thomas and Margaret started jumping and shouting, asking questions all at once. Zach set Penelope down gently, and they gathered their children close, a family complete and growing. Margaret placed her small hand on Penelope's belly, asking if the baby was in there, and Thomas wanted to know if it would be a brother. "We'll find out when the baby comes," Penelope told them, "but either way, we'll love them just like we love both of you." That night, after the children were asleep and they lay tangled together in their bed, Zach whispered in the darkness, "Thank you." "For what?" "For taking a chance on a mountain man who had forgotten how to live. For filling this cabin with love and laughter. For giving me children I never thought I'd have. For being mine." Penelope turned in his arms to face him, moonlight streaming through the window illuminating his beloved face. "Thank you for buying me silk when I thought no one would ever see past my tattered dress. Thank you for taking me away from a life that was slowly killing me. Thank you for showing me what love really looks like." He kissed her then, deep and slow, a kiss that held years of devotion and decades more to come. They made love tenderly, celebrating the new life growing inside her, celebrating the life they had built together from a chance meeting and one man's decision that a woman in a tattered dress deserved better. Their third child, another boy they named Samuel, came that winter, arriving more easily than Thomas had. By then, Zach was a practiced hand at births, though he still worried and fussed and nearly drove Penelope to distraction with his hovering. Samuel was a quiet baby, content to watch the world with serious eyes, so unlike his boisterous siblings. Time continued its steady march. The children grew, and Penelope and Zach grew with them, adapting to the needs of each new stage. The cabin saw more additions, a second story added when the children needed separate rooms, a larger porch built when they needed more space to gather. The vegetable garden expanded year by year, and Zach built Penelope a proper chicken coop and then a small barn for the milk cow he surprised her with one spring. Thomas grew into a young man who was the image of his father, tall and broad and strong, with the same gray-blue eyes. He was gentle despite his size, and girls from town started finding excuses to visit once he turned 17. Margaret became beautiful, with long dark hair and a spirit that wouldn't be contained by anyone's expectations. She could outshoot her brothers and track as well as her father, and she had no patience for the social niceties that Eureka Springs expected of young women. Samuel was the scholar, always reading, always asking questions, fascinated by everything from the stars to the plants that grew in the forest. Penelope watched her children become adults with pride and a bittersweet awareness that time was carrying them all forward. She and Zach had gray threading through their hair now, and his beard had gone silver. Lines marked their faces, evidence of years spent smiling and living fully. But the love between them hadn't diminished. If anything, it had deepened, becoming something unshakable and eternal. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Zach took Penelope back to Eureka Springs. They walked into the mercantile, now run by Peterson's son since old Mr. Peterson had passed on. The place looked much the same, though the inventory had changed with the times. Zach led Penelope to the spot where they had first met, where 3 cruel women had tried to break her spirit. "You remember standing here?" he asked. "Every detail. I was buying beans and trying not to cry. I felt so small and worthless. And now?" She looked at him, this man who had seen her value when no one else had. "Now I know I was never worthless. I was just waiting for someone to see the truth." He pulled a wrapped package from his coat. "I have something for you." Inside was a length of silk, the same blue as the first dress he had bought her fabric for all those years ago. "Zach, what's this for?" "For reminding us both of where we started. For showing that sometimes the best things in life come from the darkest moments, and because I never get tired of seeing you in blue silk." She laughed through tears and kissed him right there in the mercantile, not caring who saw. "You're still the most ridiculous man I ever met. And you're still the strongest woman I've ever known." They walked out of that store, hand in hand. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from pain and loneliness. The town had changed around them, new buildings and new faces, but they remained constant. A love story that had started with silk and kindness and grown into something extraordinary. Years continued to pass. Thomas married a girl from town, a sweet-natured woman named Lucy, who fit seamlessly into their family. He built a cabin on the other side of the mountain and started his own family, bringing his children to visit their grandparents often. Margaret refused every suitor who came calling, declaring she had no interest in marriage, and instead opened a store in town where she sold furs and smoked game, scandalizing the ladies and making a surprising amount of money. Samuel went east to university, writing long letters home about his studies and the wider world, but always returning in summers to the mountain that was in his blood. Zach and Penelope grew old together in the cabin they had made into a home. They sat on the porch in the evenings, watching sunsets that never grew old, holding hands with the comfortable ease of a lifetime together. They told stories to their grandchildren, who sat wide-eyed, listening to tales of how Grandpa had rescued Grandma, and how one act of kindness had changed everything. On a warm evening in late summer, when Penelope was 63 and Zach 66, they sat on that porch watching another sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and rose. Their children and grandchildren had just left after a large family gathering, and the cabin was quiet once more. "Do you ever regret it?" Zach asked, his voice still deep despite his years. "Leaving town with a stranger? Taking such a risk?" Penelope looked at him, at the face she knew better than her own, marked by time but still beloved. "Not for a single second. You gave me the best life I could have imagined." "We gave each other that." He squeezed her hand gently. "I was half dead when I saw you in that mercantile, going through the motions but not really living. You brought me back, Penelope. You made everything worth it again." She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling his strength still there despite the years. "I love you, Zachary Garrison, just as much today as I did the day you proposed to me in the middle of town." "I love you too. Always have, always will." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower, painting the world in brilliant colors. The creek sang its eternal song, and somewhere in the forest, an owl began its nightly hunt. The mountain held them in its embrace, this place that had given them refuge and watched their love story unfold over decades. "We did good, didn't we?" Penelope asked softly. "With our lives? With our children? We did better than good. We took our second chances and made something beautiful." Zach's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close. "You know what I think about sometimes?" "What?" "Those women who mocked your dress. I wonder if they ever realized that their cruelty led to this, that by trying to break you, they pushed you toward the best thing that ever happened to either of us." Penelope smiled. "I doubt they think about it at all, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that we found each other, that you saw past a tattered dress to the woman underneath, that you chose kindness when you could have chosen indifference. Best choice I ever made. Best choice we both made." As darkness fell and stars began to emerge in the vast sky above the mountains, Zach and Penelope rose and went inside their cabin. They banked the fire and prepared for bed with the routine of long habit. In the bedroom they had shared for over 40 years. They lay down together, her back to his front, his arm around her waist, just as it had been countless nights before. "Good night, my love," Penelope whispered. "Good night, Penelope. Dream of silk and mountains and all the days we still have ahead." She smiled in the darkness, warm and safe and surrounded by love. Outside, the mountain stood eternal, keeping watch over the cabin and the two souls who had found their home in its embrace. The creek sang on, the trees whispered in the night breeze, and inside the cabin, two hearts beat in the comfortable rhythm of a love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger for it. They had started with nothing but a tattered dress and a stranger's kindness. They had built a life, a family, a legacy of love that would echo through their children and grandchildren for generations to come. It was a simple story in many ways, a tale of one man seeing another person's worth and choosing to act on it. But from that simple beginning had grown something extraordinary, proof that the smallest acts of compassion could change the entire course of a life. And so they lived on, Zachary and Penelope Garrison, the mountain man, and the woman he had rescued with silk, and taken away from cruelty to a life of love and joy and endless mountain sunsets. Their story became legend in Eureka Springs, whispered to daughters as proof that true love existed, told to sons as an example of what real men did when they saw someone in need. It was a reminder that everyone had value, that kindness mattered, and that sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected places. The years continued their march, as years always do, but the love remained constant. When Zach eventually passed at 73, surrounded by family in the cabin he had built with his own hands, Penelope held his hand and whispered all the ways he had made her life beautiful. And when she followed him 2 years later, she went peacefully, a smile on her lips, knowing she would see him again beyond the mountains. Their children buried them side by side on a hill overlooking the cabin, with a view of the mountains they had loved. The headstone was simple, bearing their names and a single inscription that Thomas had chosen because it captured the essence of their story. She was worth silk. He gave her the world. The cabin stood for generations, maintained by their descendants who understood that some places held more than memories. They held proof that love could transform lives, that one person's kindness could ripple outward through time, creating waves of goodness that never fully faded. Children played where Penelope had once planted her garden. Couples sat on the porch where Zach and Penelope had watched countless sunsets. And always, the mountain stood watch, eternal and unchanging, guardian of a love story that proved sometimes the greatest treasures came wrapped in the most unexpected packages. In the end, it was never really about the silk dress, though that remained an important symbol. It was about a man who chose to see value where others saw only poverty. It was about a woman who had the courage to accept help when pride might have made her refuse. It was about two wounded souls finding each other at exactly the right moment and choosing to build something beautiful from the wreckage of their pasts. It was about love in its truest form, unconditional and transformative and strong enough to last beyond a lifetime. And on quiet nights, when the wind moved through the trees just right, locals swore you could still feel their presence on the mountain, not as ghosts but as a lingering warmth, a sense of peace and rightness that permeated the very air. It was as if the mountain itself remembered and honored the love story it had sheltered, keeping watch over the legacy of Zachary and Penelope Garrison, the mountain man who saw worth in a tattered dress, and the woman who gave him reason to live again. Their great-grandchildren told the story to their own children, ensuring that the tale never faded. It became more than family history. It became a teaching tool, a reminder that appearances meant nothing compared to character, that kindness was never wasted, that love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances. Young girls heard it and dreamed of being valued for who they truly were. Young boys heard it and learned that real strength meant protecting those who needed protection, that masculine power was best used in service of kindness. The silk dress that Penelope had made from the first bolt Zach bought her was preserved, carefully stored in a cedar chest that passed from generation to generation. It was brought out on special occasions, a tangible connection to the beginning of it all. The fabric had faded slightly with age, but the stitches were still tight, proof of Penelope's skill and care. Every woman who saw it understood that it represented far more than clothing. It represented transformation, hope, and the beginning of something extraordinary. The town of Eureka Springs eventually erected a small plaque at the site where the old mercantile had stood. It marked the spot where Zachary Garrison had first stood up for Penelope Bradford, where he had bought her silk and began a courtship that would become the stuff of local legend. Tourists stopped to read it and take pictures. Locals used it as a meeting point, casually saying they would meet someone at the silk plaque without needing further explanation. But the truest memorial to their love was not the plaque or even the preserved dress. It was in the lives they had touched, the family they had raised, and the example they had set. It was in Thomas, who treated his wife with the same reverence his father had shown his mother. It was in Margaret, who never let anyone tell her she was less than she was, carrying her mother's strength into a new generation. It was in Samuel, whose intellect and curiosity had been nurtured in a home full of love and support. It was in all the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried forward the values that Zach and Penelope had lived by, values of kindness, strength, love, and the unshakable belief that every person had inherent worth, regardless of what they wore or how much money they had. The mountain, that eternal sentinel, continued to stand watch over the cabin and the gravesite on the hill. Seasons changed, snow fell and melted, flowers bloomed and faded. But the mountain remained. It had witnessed the whole story from beginning to end, from the day Zach first brought Penelope up the steep trail to the days of their children's children playing in the creek. If mountains could be said to have memory, then this one surely remembered the love that had flourished in its shadow. And so the story ended where all the best love stories end, with two souls united beyond death, their legacy living on in the lives they had touched and the family they had created. It was a story that proved love was not about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. It was about seeing someone truly, about choosing kindness over indifference, about building something beautiful day by day through the simple act of showing up for each other. It was about a mountain man who saw past a tattered dress to the woman of strength and grace beneath, and a woman who saw past a rough exterior to the gentle, loving heart within. Their love had started with silk and ended with eternity, and in between, they had lived fully and loved completely. They had proved that sometimes the most important moment of your life could come when a stranger chose to see your worth. They had shown that taking a chance on love, even when it seemed too fast or too risky, could lead to the greatest happiness imaginable. And they had demonstrated that a life built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and unwavering commitment could weather any storm and emerge stronger on the other side. In the end, Zachary Garrison had bought Penelope Bradford's silk and taken her away from mockery and poverty. But what he had really given her was far more precious than fabric or escape. He had given her love, security, purpose, and a life worth living. And she had given him the same, pulling him back from isolation and grief to remind him what it meant to truly live. Together, they had created something neither could have achieved alone, a love story for the ages, proof that sometimes the most beautiful things in life began with the simplest act of kindness.